This video is going to take you through an introduction to using Microsoft Access. Some of the objectives of this video will be: first, understand what a relational database is. We're going to explore a database, walk you through how to create a database. This demonstration is only going to look at how you create a table within a database, the importance of primary keys when you create a table, how to relate two tables together, and then just an overview how to enter as well as edit data within a database. So let's get started. To demonstrate today, I am going to open up a database that already has some sample data in it. And anytime you open up a database, you have to make sure that that database is enabled. Okay, so you have the content enabled where you're able to go in and actually enter in information. So within this database, there are 4 things called objects. Okay, and so by definition, an object actually allows you to perform different skills and features within a database. So these are going to be parts of your database that can help you either view the data, edit it, manage it, analyze it, and be able to do any type of reports. So a database allows you really to manage a lot of data, different than Excel, because it then allows you to relate those different tables together. Think of a table as a worksheet, similar to if you have some knowledge about Excel. So within a worksheet, we have rows and columns, and that is what makes up a relational database. Within those rows or columns, it's going to be the same way as you would within Excel, in the fact that you can add as many columns or any rows as you choose. Something I want to point out about Access is the understanding of something that's called a record. So within each of these so within Excel, we said cells. For Access, these are actually going to be called fields. So each of these individual boxes are known as data fields. And once you have included data within each of these data fields, an entire row of that data is known as a record. So within this table, which this table is also known as something called a data sheet. So the data sheet, notice within our Access ribbon, we have a Home tab. And if you click on View, View is showing this is your data sheet view. Okay, so each of the objects, when we get to the other ones later on in videos, will have different types of views. So for the table view, we have 2. And right now we're on a data sheet view, which is the same as your Excel spreadsheet. Within that view, we see that we have a total of 44 records. So here down below, you will see for each of your worksheets, you're able to skip, to each record, and it takes you through each record on the line, or you can go all the way to the end, or the option also is if you want to create a new one, then you will just click here and start typing in that new data. Okay, but we'll get to editing and changing data in a second. So when you are looking at your objects within Access, you have a couple of options here where you can kind of close it or open it to be able to see all the objects that you have created. Within this database, we have several different tables that are already created. Okay, so it looks like a total of about 6 tables that are already here. But when you think about creating a new table, so say you want to create a new table, you would then go to Create and you see Table. If you click Table, we have Table 1, which is our new table there. If we go to try to enter any data in there, and we could enter any data in there, but the first thing we need to do is actually title our table. Couple of ways of how you can do that. You can go to right click and then you can go to rename. So it says you can't rename it while it's open. Okay, that's fine. then why don't we go ahead and close it? When you close it, this is where your save as name box will come up. Okay, so you get a dialog box to put in the name, and I'm going to put test. This is how you would name your table. Now we have a table name. We can double click in there and then go back in and modify it however we want. When we create our table, it's best to change your view from your datasheet view and go to your design view. Your design view then allows you to put in each of the fields names. You have ID. Okay, I'm just going to make something up here, and I'm going to put in first name. I'm going to then put in last name. Okay, I'm also going to put in zip code. Okay, so you get the idea that whatever the header is for your data, this is where you build your table here. The other nice feature within Access is you're able to modify how you would like that data to be entered. If it's a name, okay, you don't want it to be a number, you can then change that. So I'm actually go down here to these first, and I'm going to do long text for the name. I'm also going to do long text for the last name, because if I use short text just down here, notice there is a limit to how many characters could be entered. So the importance of having this allows you to have some standardization where there's consistency within each of these data fields. And if you're working in a large data set, you want your data to be consistent when it comes down to reporting and actually compiling the data together. So an example of the zip code, we can go down here, make this a number. Okay, and you can even get even more specific of how you want that to look with the additional features down here of how you want those values to be formatted, etc. Okay, so once you create a table, why don't we've already put in kind of our headers, which is also known as the field name, and we've defined how we want that data to be entered and formatted within that field. I'm going to change it back to the datasheet view. Okay, you always have to save. Notice how within Access it always prompts you to make sure you save. So now that we saved our data, notice that our header row is now populated and we're ready to put in data. So I'm actually just going to put in some data here. I'm just going to put in Preppy, okay, which is who I am, professor. And I'm going to put a zip code in of 45678, okay? So notice how that populates, okay, within Access, and then it says, well, do you want another one? Okay, then I can put in more data and keep populating it as much as I want. The other thing I want to highlight is when you populate data within Access, the key is to identify something called a primary key. So I'm going to go back to my patients file here, table, and notice that we have a patient ID, patient last name, patient first name. This data was already populated. And I'm actually going to change my view because the only way you can see this primary key is in your design view. So what is the primary key? Each row is a record. Within each record, there has to be some unique identifier within that row to say this is what specifies the difference from each of those records. So when you think about healthcare, the unique identifier for patients would be what? Their medical record number, or maybe an account number, because that's unique. Whereas in Access, that allows us then to track that patient to see how many times potentially they are entered within our data. Because remember, the goal of a database is to allow your data to be consistent as well as accurate. Okay, so we don't want any duplicates when we're trying to analyze data and compile this data together. Within each of your tables, you have to have a primary key specified, which is that unique identifier. How you would identify that is once you have clicked on your table, you've changed your view, you see here on your design tab, you can specify which of these would be your primary key. So here the patient ID is identified as our primary key. Let's go back to the table we created ourselves. And we're going to change the view and see, do we have a primary key? We do. This primary key was specified because we created a new table. Now, what if I don't want this to be my primary key? I can take it off. Okay, notice all you do is unclick the primary key and then designate which one I want. So if I said, maybe zip code is unique, I can specify that as my primary key. Okay, the point is each of your tables have to have a primary key, and you can have as many tables as you choose within your database. You just have to make sure each of those has a unique identifier, which is your primary key within each of your tables. Now, how do you relate tables? The purpose of having your primary key is to identify the uniqueness of each table in order to relate them together. So if we go to our database tools, because this is where you'll find relationships. Because let me give you a scenario. What if you want to identify the number of patients that came in for a visit on a particular day by a particular provider? Well, we have a visits table, we have a patients table, we have a providers table. This database even expands more to diagnosis, insurance, all within one database. This allows for organization. That's the big thing, okay? I probably should have said that from the beginning. A database allows you to be able to take raw facts, raw data, and organize it in a concise manner to be able to relate them together in order to extract that data into potentially a report. So relationships will look as such. And notice each of our tables, okay, and these are called field lists, and actually this here is called a data model, okay, where you actually see a picture format of all of the tables that are located in your database, and then to see how they're all related to each other, okay. So here's our insurance, and we have two data fields in insurance table. We have our patients table, we have our visits, our diagnosis, and procedures. And notice in each of these, we have our primary keys identified, okay, and it is identified by key. When you are relating two tables together, what you're trying to do is find what are the unique, okay, not the primary key, but what are the data fields that are the same, okay, meaning they're the same in one table and the same in the next in order to relate them to each other. Well, let's look. Here's our primary key of insurance. And we also have a payment, okay, which is probably the insurance code here. The key is it has to be the same or those tables won't relate. If they don't relate, then we're unable to extract data from those tables at the same time. So what that is known is as a one-to-many relationship. If we look at this one patient, it's saying that this patient ID could be in this visits table many times. Let's think about that. One patient could have several visits. Makes sense, right? What about a diagnosis code? Well, we know a diagnosis code is going to be unique. But this relationship is saying one diagnosis code can be shown up many times within this visit table. Same way for a procedure code. So notice, procedure codes, diagnoses, patients, insurance, all of those are only listed once within each of these tables, but they may show up in duplicates within the visits table because each patient could have duplicates of each of those individual data fields. So you make and show these relationships within your database when you are creating tables in order for you to know how do each of my tables relate to each other when it's time to extract that data later on, okay? How you would edit some of those relationships would just go to edit relationship, choose your table, and then notice it's saying insurance and payment is the same. You'll join it, make sure it's reinforced. And this is to identify that relationship and press OK. And then there you have your relationships modified. Okay. Real quick, I'm going to go back to the table. And we've already talked about how you enter in data, but you also can modify data by making your column smaller or bigger, all the same. So this is kind of the first part of Access. Okay. Stay tuned for part 2.